I can do more of a lecture style for this first part, and then we have a little activity that I planned for you. And if there's time at the end, I'll go over the exam. I might need to kick that down to next class just because the activity took a long time for the last section and we didn't actually get to go over the exam. So if there's time, we'll figure it out. So anyways, twice born. So here's just some, some Indian cultural information, and that's how we approached the caste system earlier, right? It was this Indian cultural phenomenon, but we also did tie it back into America in different ways too, right? We had the various podcasts about the American idols, and even the Buddhist podcast, right, about Senzaki. There was also some, we could say, race dynamics going on there that we could tie into caste too. Maybe I will jog you guys' memory. What were the four castes of the caste system in India? Four castes in India? Question mark. What's the highest caste? Brahmin. Good. Yeah. And so they're the priests, right? You don't have to know the Indian names for the other ones, but what's the second one? What's under them? In Sanskrit, they're called the kshatriya. How do we translate that into English? What caste was Rama? Chat, you got to help us out. We can't make Brendan answer every question as much as I might be tempted to do so. So yeah, Brahmin is number one. What's number two? What's under the Brahmins? I'm glad I'm doing this because this is important for this story to make any sense, as we got to remember the caste system in India. The warriors, very good. Okay, so the warrior, maybe we can write warrior / king, right? Kshatriya, okay, very good. What's the third one? Vaishya, good. Merchants. Yeah, so it's kind of, let's say merchant / farmer. It's just like the regular people, right? So these are the regular folks. And then fourth one are the Shudras. Yeah, Kevin knows. Okay, good. See, now we're rolling here. And so who are the Shudras? They're the servants. They're the ones who, I don't know, answer the door and sweep the floor and that kind of stuff. And so this is the caste system, right? Outside of this, there's one even lower, though, isn't there? What are they called? Can I see? Yeah, you guys can see. The Dalit. Yeah, so they're the Dalit. And so that's an important word for this story. They're the Dalit, otherwise known as outcast, not with a K, but C-A-S-T-E, right? They're outside of the caste system. They're outcasts. Very good. So maybe you remember the story about the cosmic man, right? Brahmins come from the mouth. Remember that? Warrior king, they were the arms. What part of the body are these guys? Merchant farmer. Legs, and then the feet, and then they're like not even part of the body, right? They're outside of the caste system. So all right, so that's a little review. It's something we studied a while ago. You guys study a lot of things, maybe you don't remember. So here's a story, very short. If you don't remember what the reading was about for today, you can open it up and follow along. I encourage you to, because we're going to do an exercise in a while where we will look back at this. So please do open Wilkerson up and have it in front of you, if you don't already. So this first part, shedding the sacred thread, is about a Brahmin family. It's specifically about a Brahmin boy and his father. And again, very short little stories, just 4 pages, but it's pretty provocative. There's a lot that goes on here. First, I just want to explain what is the sacred thread. So when somebody is born, like a high caste person, these first three are called twice born. Twice born. And why are they called that? Is because they are firstborn of their mother's womb. You can see this here. And then the second time they are quote unquote born is they go through a rite of passage. Have you ever heard of rites of passage before? That's a thing people talk about, isn't it? What's a rite of passage? You guys ever done a rite of passage before? You probably have, whether you knew it or not. What's a rite of passage from our society? There are many examples we could come up with. I have something very specific in mind, but there are a lot of things we could say. Turning 21, okay. And what do people do on this rite of passage, Leo? What kind of ritual activities do they do when they turn 21? Kevin's very explicit. Okay, drink. 21 shots. Drink legally. Yeah, that's good. I like the quotes there. That makes that very clear. No, don't ever drink 21 shots. That's always a bad idea. I feel like some of you guys are probably not 21 yet. So please, for your old teacher's sake, just take like 2 or 3 shots. It'll be enough, honestly. Okay, very good. So that's a rite of passage. Before you're 21, you cannot drink. After 21, you can legally drink. You pass from one social category to another, right? And so this one is about boys becoming men. Actually, that's not true. There are rites of passage where boys become men, and so the 21 thing is almost like that. But like a sweet 16 is almost like the passage from childhood into adulthood. Graduation is one I had in mind, right? You're passing from being a student into being a graduate, or from being a high school student into being a college student, and then eventually you will be done with school at some point, right? And so that's another rite of passage. So we can think of a bunch of different rites of passage. Here is one, the twice born. Yeah, confirmation is the religious one. Exactly. Good. So it's a pretty important religious term, rite of passage. It's I believe anthropologists came up with it in like the 60s, and so it's just marking these transitions in our lives. In fact, I would argue we need more of these things. I think they're actually pretty useful. So this particular one is marking the movement from being kind of a kid into this twice born community. Actually, it is a lot like confirmation now that I think about it. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Eric. And so what do you do when you go through this process is you get this sacred thread. You might not be able to see it, but it's this yellow thread that is on, it's not, the flowers are nice and this other larger cloth band is nice, but I'm talking about the small, thin yellow thread here. That's the sacred thread we're talking about. And all of these twice born cast members wear it, right? So it kind of marks them as a higher caste person. So we've sort of answered this question now. It marks somebody as a member of this higher caste, right? But here we have a story of somebody who is shedding the sacred thread. It sort of has a nice sound to shed the thread, right? Why would anybody do that? And again, if you don't remember, we can look at it together. Maybe that's a good thing to do. Why don't we look at it together? Why would anybody shed this thread? Yeah, here's the caste that we were just talking about, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya. Here we have the story of a Brahmin who he said he lost his father that day. What happened with his father? I guess we could read it, but that would take too long. So why don't we summarize it? Can anybody summarize it for me? Going once, going twice. All right, I'll just do it. it's too much work getting you guys to summarize things. So here we have a father. He's a Brahmin, of course. He encounters a Dalit, right? The lowest of the low, the outcast. He attacked a lower caste person and was looked down on. Yeah, that's basically what happened. Exactly. So often how is caste kind of enforced? Well, let's say Brendan is high caste and I'm low caste, and he's walking by and I don't get out of his way, or I like look him in the eye and kind of stare him down or something like that. Then sometimes caste is enforced with violence, right? To respond to my moment of disrespect. And of course, Brendan would never do this, but he might attack me, right? So the boy's father took a stick and charged after the Dalit laborer. The Dalit pulled a limb of a tree to protect himself from the father, and then the father got sort of scared and ran away, right? And it goes on, but the father sort of loses his mind a little bit, right? He was humiliated, he ran away, and they kind of, maybe he was already mentally unwell. That's entirely possible. Maybe the pressures to live out a role that one was born to but did not choose for oneself, in which one's temperament was unsuited. Maybe that was too much for him too. It's hard to say. But because of this encounter, this uncomfortable encounter, the father had a bit of a breakdown. So yeah, thank you, Eric, for helping me out there. And the story goes on, but I think we kind of get at least this first part. That should be pretty clear. And at some point, this Brahmin, toward the end of the story, again, it's only 4 pages, but toward the end of the story, he says, "I've ripped off my sacred thread. There's a poisonous snake around my neck, and its toxic venom was getting inside of me." And he also talks about being lied to. He says he had been told a lie, and his father had been told a lie, and trying to live up to the lie had taken some part of his father away. Why does he hate this thread so much? What is the lie that had been told to him? I guess those are 2 separate questions, but they're related to each other. What was the lie that had been told to the Brahmin and his father? Brandon, you know? Yeah, maybe that's pretty clear at this point, right? It's the caste system itself, right? This is a story saying that the caste system itself is a lie. And I'm belaboring the point here, but the point of this story is to show that even these high caste people, right? We usually think it's the low caste people who kind of get the short end of the stick, but it's actually kind of a sweet deal for the high caste people. But what this story is going to show that even the Brahmins suffer under the caste system, right? They have social pressures, let's say. They have certain expectations of themselves and can come into shame and humiliation if they don't uphold the caste system in the way that they're expected to. And so the story goes on. The Brahmin makes friends with Dalits, and eventually he takes it off the thread. And it's worth thinking about. What does it mean for him to shed the sacred thread? Here's what he says about it. He says, "My message to you, my message would be, I'll read it here. To take off the fake crown. It will cost you more to keep it than to let it go. It is not real. It is just a marker of your programming. You will be happier and freer without it. You will see all of humanity. You will find your true self." It's a very powerful message he's sending. So hopefully the upshot of this story makes sense. Is this relevant for America? What would it mean to shed the thread? What would it mean to shed the thread in America? Because again, the whole point of this Wilkerson's book, I know we haven't read it in a while, but the whole point of this book is to draw a connection between the caste system of India, which is what we're looking at here, and then the so-called caste system of America. So what would it mean to shed the sacred thread in America? Does that even make any sense? It's a bit more interpretive, and you have to think, well, what is the caste system in America? Who are the twice born? What are the signs of caste in America, and how could these be shed, or even can they be shed? Right? Those are all pretty open questions, and we don't have to answer them definitively. But if you have thoughts, I'd love to hear them. If not, we can do the exercise. You guys want to do the exercise? All right, let's do the exercise. So the big question for today is basically why use this language of caste instead of race or racism? And maybe we can start with that. What do you, yeah, maybe I'll open up with this. We don't have to jump into the activity quite yet. Why use caste instead of racism? What's the relationship between those words? Because again, if you read Wilkerson carefully, you might notice that actually she doesn't really use these words, race and racism, very much. And when she does, it's usually through other people, right? So there's a character in one of the stories that she says, I believe it's a story about her own life, where one of her friends calls somebody racist, but she's actually not doing that in the story, right? It's usually only other people using this word. So what's the difference between caste versus race? We talked about caste versus class before, right? That was even on an exam. Do you guys remember that? Again, this is why I give you exams, just so you remember stuff. So why don't we start with that? Caste versus class, what's the difference?
I think caste, you born in the caste and you cannot change it, but the class, it is related to your something to your social rank. So you can work your way out of the class, but you cannot work your way.
Okay, I mostly agree with you. So like Drissa said, caste is inherited, right? You can't work your way out of caste. You can work your way out of class. So we could say class is, let's say, let's call it class is economic. I know that's not what Drissa said, but class is kind of determined by your wealth, right? And your it's also kind of your education. And so if you get more education, you can maybe go higher class. There are a few different things that class are. The reason I am hesitant to say class is social status is because they're kind of both social status, right? That's really what caste means too. They're both talking about social status. And so that's why it's pretty easy to mix them up. They're both, we could say, socially constructed. Have you ever heard of social constructions before? What is a social construction? What does it mean for something to be socially constructed? Would you agree that class is a social construction? Does that make sense? I think we could all agree on that, right? There's nothing like inherently true about class. Can we agree that caste is a social construction? Is that something made by society? Is caste a social construction? I know we're digging back into an earlier part of the semester, but it's important. That's why we're spending a whole class on this, because it will tie into things we'll talk about down the road, and it's a good way of bridging different pieces of the class, reminding you of things. But what do you guys think? There's no clear answer to this necessarily. I have my thoughts, and I will share with you in a moment. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. Is class a social construction? Or sorry, is caste a social construction? Are these categories socially constructed? Yes. Right? Why do you say yes, Brendan? We talked about how they're constructed, didn't we? There's a myth. You tell the myth. Yeah. Very good. So Brendan said, when you're born, it's not like you're marked with a birthmark that says you're Brahmin or something, right? And just to be totally clear, you can't tell somebody's caste just from looking at them, not from looking at their bodies. Maybe you could tell from their clothes, right? It's sort of like a class thing. Maybe you can tell somebody's high class if they wear a Gucci belt or whatever. But yeah, in a similar way, you can't tell what somebody's caste is just from looking at them. Very good. Now maybe you saw this coming. What about race? This is sort of a complicated question. Is race biology or is it a social construct? That's actually what I've been leading to. I don't know if you saw this coming. Because that's the harder question, right? Is race biological or is race a social construct?
I will say it is a social contract because biologically we are all the same. So I will say it is just a social contract.
I love it. Yeah, I totally agree, Drissa. It's very easy to think it's biology, and I'm just going to give an example for why people might think it. Have you guys heard of 23andMe? You know what that is? The DNA testing. I'll just Google it for us. Yeah, DNA genetic testing and analysis, right? You give them your DNA and then they tell you what your race and your ethnicity is, right? You guys heard of this before? Doesn't that mean that different races have different genes, different DNA? Are there any biologists who can explain this to me? I do know the answer to this. I'm just.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. How do we make sense of this? Drissa is absolutely correct that biologically there is really only one race, the human race, and yet we have this program, 23andMe, that can tell me my race, my racial ancestral background based on DNA. How do we make sense of that? How does this work? Does anybody know?
I learned something because I took bio for 4 years in high school. Depending on where you live, heat temperature can actually take an effect on your DNA, causing your DNA strands to also be different. That's what makes your skin color darker and lighter.
Okay. So what Zamo is saying is that there are very minute, minor little differences, biologically speaking, between different races. And so when we see things like skin or hair or eye color or whatever, then we think, oh, we're different races. We must be very different. But and this is important, when it comes to your main biological functions, your guts, your blood, your immune system, all of that is the same, right? I remember I had a biology teacher who said this, and I looked all this up before class just to make sure I was citing them correctly. There's one human race, right? There's one race. It's the human race, right? Genetically speaking, we are like 99%, 99 point something percent the same. These are just minor little mutations. The 23andMe thing is tracing. They are not like expressed in your proteins or anything like that. It's just these little baby, tiny little differences that happen along the way. I don't know why do they happen. It's because of UV rays or whatever. They hit them, and so they're little mutations, little changes. But like Drissa said, I love the way he put it. We are biologically all the same. Like vast majority things, everything works the same. So when it comes to things like COVID, for example, when COVID first started coming out and Black and brown people started to get COVID at higher rates, some people started to think, oh, maybe there's some sort of biological difference here. Wrong. No, it is all social, right? It's because Black and brown people were exposed to it more. And again, this comes back to biology versus social construction, right? Races tend to be treated differently in America. Again, I think we all understand this to a certain degree, and we've talked about it in this class. But I think race is a confusing category, and it's sort of different from caste because it gets mixed up with biology, right? There's a temptation to think, oh, because we can see these differences, then somehow there's some sort of biological difference. But I think the power of this idea of caste, and again, coming back to these examples and stuff, it reminds us that these are actually categories that we create. You guys follow me so far? How's that sound? Questions? Okay, and so we've talked a lot about Buddhism. We could talk about Buddhism and caste. Maybe we don't need to do that, right? But I'll just remind you, remember the Buddha, he was a prince, he cut off his hair, he went out into the woods, he kind of gave up his role as the king, remember? So Buddhists have kind of been critics of caste in a way. And even within, this story, we can find critiques of the caste system within the Hindu system. So that's something we're going to look at today. Why don't we get to the exercise, though, if you guys don't have any questions for me. So I have 2 Google Docs for you. I'll just open one. And I'm going to break you guys into 2 groups. And what we're going to do is there are 2 stories. One, they're both very short. They're just like 5 pages. So again, please open this up if you haven't opened it yet. So here's one of them, Radicalization of the Dominant Caste. It's a short little story, 5 pages. And then I have some questions for you. The bottom line is kind of this question of racism. I know racism it's a kind of a naughty word. It's an uncomfortable topic. People don't like to talk about it. People don't like to be called racist. People often don't like to call each other racist. Some people do like to call each other racist, but a lot of the time we just don't even want to talk about this word, right? But we're going to talk about it here. So here in the story, we get Wilkerson's friend calling somebody racist. And so that's one of the stories. The other story is this plumber. He comes to a house, and this is Wilkerson, right? So I just for the story to make sense, both of these stories are about Wilkerson. I don't know if I've shown you her picture, but she's a Black woman, right? So she's talking about her own experiences with race and with racism. And that's what this whole book touches on. It comes back to her own experiences. And so, yeah, the heart is the last frontier, sorry. We have this plumber, Wilkerson's talking to him. And again, is this plumber being racist? And these are examples, I'll just warn you, they're sort of tricky. It's a little hard to nail down. It's not obviously racist. It's not obviously not racist. So this is why they're actually perfect to have conversations about. So so that's the task for you. I want you to read these stories and talk about this question. Are they being racist? All right, now we're recording. Okay, group 2, what do you guys got? Give me something. What's the story about? Maybe we can look at the prompt here. This is a good one. So here's the quote that I pulled out. There's an image of packing popcorn. You guys know what packing popcorn is? Those weird styrofoam little things. It's floating in some water in Wilkerson's basement, right? So this is about Wilkerson. And Wilkerson says, hey, could that have kept the sump pump from working? He says, nah, but the sump pump needs clearing out though. And then Wilkerson thinks to herself, why is he not doing that? Wasn't that what he was here for? Instead, he offered to write an estimate for a new one, but why buy a new one if this one was still working? If I called him in to fix whatever because the water built up. Since he'd arrived, I was the one sweeping water, moving boxes, searching for the drain. He was doing less than the HVAC guy who had done, and so blah, blah. It's part of this big sort of story. She's having some problems with the sump pump in her basement. So group 2, is the plumber being racist?
I would say he's being racist here because most of the time when you call people to come fix something, when they come to your house and you're Black or brown, they really don't care. Like they do whatever they feel like doing. But I'm pretty sure if they go to a white man's house, they will act differently because they know most of the time white people will just call and report them. And anytime a white man call and report a worker, he get in trouble. But when they report, a Black man call and report, it really doesn't go anywhere. So, and most workers are conscious of that. So when they go to brown or Black people's house, they do whatever they feel like doing
Mhm.
because they know like nothing will happen to them in case the person call and report, nothing will happen. So they really don't care. At that point, I think it was being racist.
Thank you, Drissa. Thank you for making a statement. I appreciate it. Yeah, and so this is another example where we want more information, right? Like Drissa was saying, if we could compare the way that this guy acts in a black person's house versus a white person's house, then we could really say for sure whether he's racist or not. But what Drissa is drawing from is his wider experiences. And again, if we look at Wilkerson's situation, she is speaking from her lifetime of experience of being a black woman in America, right? And so she has been treated a certain way, let's just call it the way that Drissa was just describing. She has been treated a certain way her entire life, right? And if you read this whole book, then you will see many examples of the way in which she has been treated before. And so she is able to say, this man is treating me the way that people treat me when they are drawing these lines, right, between them and myself, right? We could call it caste. We could say he is a higher caste and he's treating me like I'm a lower caste. We could also call it sexism, right? Sometimes I imagine it's sort of weird and uncomfortable if you're a woman alone at a house and you have the plumber come and he's a big man who smells of beer and tobacco. Wasn't that what the chapter begins with? And so that's sort of an uncomfortable moment, right? And so the plumber starts treating you in sort of a weird way. And we could say, no, this isn't racist. This is clearly sexist, right? And so, but all of this would be a bit of a distraction because the point is exactly what Drissa was saying, is that he's treating her as someone who is separate from him, right? As a separate category, maybe even as a lower category, or as a category that needs perhaps less help. He's less willing to help. Some students in another class were saying he's lazy. Maybe he's not racist, he's just lazy. Maybe he's just a jerk. Maybe he just had a bad day. Maybe, yeah, we don't know, right? We don't know why he's being a jerk. But the point of this story, right, is to identify the fact is that he is being a jerk, right? It's maybe we can't get into his head and say why, but based on a lifetime of experience, we can trust Wilkerson when she says that this is coming from a situation of caste. We have 1 minute left, and there's actually another important question. Why did maybe, if you have thoughts, I'd love to hear it. If you don't, I can just riff on it. But why did talking about family change their interaction? So the heart is the last frontier, right? There's this kind of heartfelt moment between them. After this really uncomfortable exchange, then what happened? I was steaming now, right? She got really mad at him. And then she eventually started talking about her mother. She said, my mother died last week. Is your mother still alive? And he looked down at the wet floor and they started to connect. So why is talking about their mothers, why does that transform this moment for them? Why does this take us away from the situation that Drissa was just describing for us and into a new situation? What changes?
I think they're trying to make a connection between racism and sexism.
Can you say more? What do you mean? Connection between racism and sexism?
Like from racism to make a connection, like okay, I will think about it more.
Okay, think about it more. I like Eric's comment here. They both lost loved ones and were able to connect, right? And so this is something Brendan and I would talk about, and we're out of time now, so I'll just say it very quickly. It's an important point. They both became children, right? So whereas we can draw these lines between people and say we're totally different and it's because of this reason or that reason or whatever reason, all of that gets washed away, right? And when we think about our parents, we are all children of somebody, right? Regardless of what our relationship is, we're all children of somebody. And so when they start talking about their mothers, all of a sudden they can connect, right? Just like Eric said, they can think about each other on more equal terms, maybe we could say. There's a touching moment, they solve the problem, and in the end, Wilkerson, the end of the book. I encourage you to read it if this is sort of an interesting topic for you. We can give her the last word. She calls that we need this kind of empathy, right? We need to recognize that we need each other. He needs her, she needs him. We need to use this as a way to kind of overcome these boundaries. Maybe this is like a predictable solution, but I think recognizing these very subtle lines in the sand, that the not obviously racist ones, the ones that are sort of quiet, the ones at the restaurant, the ones at even the school, right? All these different public places that we live and work in. These are the places that we need to see these lines, and the place where we need to use empathy to kind of cross beyond them. So we can pick this up next time, but I wanted to give Wilkerson the last word. Okay, we're over time. Any last thoughts before we call it a day?